So, you just bought your new succulents, you potted them up, and you have a very lovely spot in your house where you're placing them and where they're looking very beautiful, and maybe you even started watering them. But you notice that after a few days, after a few weeks, or after a few months, that your succulent is not growing. So what could be the issue? Well, in this video, we're going to be talking about that topic. We're going to find out 5 different reasons why your succulents is not growing. But before we dive into our topic, let me just welcome you guys to our channel, to Kalei Plants, where we always strive to learn more about succulents and how to care for them. So if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe below so that you will always be updated with our most latest care tips for our succulents. Now let's go over the 5 reasons why your succulents are not growing, and the first of that is your plant is not yet established. Now usually, if we buy succulents here in the Philippines, we buy them with no potting mix, with no roots, and most probably they are cuttings and they have very little roots to begin with, so they will still have to root into their new potting mix and into their new pots before you can expect them to produce more growth. Now succulents, being the survival plants that they are, they actually have a lot of adaptation to survive extreme situations, and one of that is that if they detect that they are unrooted, if they don't have roots, and if they're not attached to their potting mix, they will prioritize growing roots before they start growing new leaves. So if your plant is still not rooted, don't expect it to produce a lot of leaves because it will still need to produce a lot of roots under it. And also, in order to produce those roots, these succulents will tend to consume the energy they have in their leaves so that they can establish themselves properly. So you might find out that if you buy a new succulent, that they might lose 1 or 2 leaves in order to root, in order to attach themselves to the soil. Much like with this plant. So for example, this is a recently propagated succulent. You can see that it will probably lose 1 or 2 leaves. It actually lost a couple of leaves right there down below, so that it can attach itself to its potting mix, so that it can root itself. Now unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do to avoid this process. Succulents will really lose their leaves in order to establish themselves. So the only thing that we can start with is to avoid buying small succulents, and also we must have the exact potting mix that suits their needs, because if a potting mix is very loose or it doesn't have a lot of organic material, then the plant will not root well and the roots will tend to die before they attach themselves to the soil. And also, if the soil is very high in organic materials, if it's a very heavy potting mix, then the plant may not be able to penetrate the potting mix with its roots, so that will also hinder root development, so that will cause the plant to lose a lot more leaves than necessary. That is also why I don't recommend buying very small succulents, because if you're still a beginner and you're still learning about how to make a proper potting mix, then small succulents might not actually be very successful for you right away, because they will tend to look ugly before they establish themselves. Slightly related to that is a video that I recently made that is about succulents that I wouldn't buy. So if you follow my list on that video, which I will link on the description, you may find that you will have more success with your plant purchases the next time that you buy succulents online. The second reason your succulent is not growing is because you're watering too little. Now, succulents, because they are fat plants, they actually store moisture or water into their leaves, so that makes them grow, that makes them plump, that makes them very beautiful and fat. So if you're not watering your succulent, then you won't see your succulent growing so much, because the water that you're giving it is the water that it will store in its leaves. So if you're not watering it enough, then it will not produce new leaves. This could be a problem with beginners, because some beginners think that succulents don't like water, that succulents will die if they get watered. But actually, succulents love watering. They just want to be watered at the exact time. Now, if you're not watering them enough, if they're already thirsty and you're not yet watering them, if you're skipping the watering day when your succulent needs water, then you might find that their growth will be very slow, and they could also go dormant, or they could become stressed if you're not watering them enough. So that will also further slow down the growth of your plants. The third reason your succulent may not be growing is because you're not giving them enough light. Now, a lot of beginners, myself included, think that succulents, because they are small plants, that you can place them virtually anywhere and that they will just grow and thrive. But that is not actually true, especially with this type of low-growing rosette-style succulents like Echeverias. They actually need about 5 to 6 hours of direct sun, or a full sun of filtered light, a full day of filtered light, in order to keep them compact and in order for them to keep growing beautifully, because without that sunlight, the plant will not absorb a lot of water in its leaves and also it could etiolate, so it might not grow beautifully without enough sun. And also plants that doesn't get enough sun will not get plump, will not get fatter leaves. So the plants that gets a lot more sun will get fatter leaves for much longer. So if you notice that your succulent is getting thinner leaves and also it's etiolating, then you probably need to give it a little bit more sun. The fourth reason your succulent is not growing is because it is stressed or dormant. Now, we all know succulents need a lot of sun and they also need infrequent watering, but some succulents actually are more sensitive than others, and some varieties will need a lot more shade in order to thrive and in order for them to grow, because not all succulents grow in full sun, especially if you're trying to grow crassulas and haworthias. So those are sensitive when it comes to heat and sun exposure. So if you're growing those sensitive varieties and you're giving them extreme heat or extreme sun and you're not watering them very frequently, then that will make them stressed and make their growth much slower. Now also, another thing you have to learn about growing succulents is that they are not always actively growing. Succulents are actually opportunistic growers, which means they will grow when the conditions is better for them. So for example, this plant, the succulent right here, you can see that it's got really plump leaves and really bright coloring. So that means this stress is a little bit dormant. Actually, they are focusing their energy right now in survival rather than in growth. So if their focus is on survival, then they will not produce a lot of growth, especially if it's not a growing season for them. Some succulents will grow more during the winter and some other succulents will grow more during the summer. Now, for the non-dormant, look for this succulent. This is another purple delight. These are actually the same plant. So you can see that this plump one, it's not producing a lot of growth for me, but this one, because it got its leaves much thinner, then that means that this is not as stressed as this one, and this is also producing faster growth. Now, there are a lot of factors to consider why your succulent is dormant, why your succulent is stressed. So I have a lot of videos about succulent problems, but actually you can't really control when your succulent is gonna wake up from its dormancy or if it's gonna start growing again. So you just have to be patient when it comes to succulents, and you have to be mindful if they are stressed or if they are dormant, because if they are stressed and dormant, you wouldn't want to water them a lot, especially with this one because it's a little bit dormant. So I'm not watering it a lot, but this one, since it started growing again, it started actively producing growth, I added fertilizers and I gave it much more watering. So now it's growing much bigger than the other one, even though they are the same age. Now I have a theory about these two plants, and I think that because this plant is not yet established, as you can see, it's got a bigger pot, so it's taking a long time for it to produce new leaves. But because this is in a more shallower, smaller pot, then it actually established a lot more quicker, so now it's growing a lot more growth. And that brings us to the fifth reason why your succulent is not growing, and that is because you planted it in a very big pot. Now I have another succulent here. Let me just take it. Okay. So if you're trying to grow this size of succulent into this big of a pot, then you might find that your succulent will not grow right away, because like I said before, succulents will prioritize root growth over their foliar growth. So if they're planted in a very big pot, they will need to produce a lot more roots before they will start to grow new leaves. Now, some people will think that they want to plant their succulents in a very big pot, but that is not actually a thing that I will recommend, because in very big pots, they also have a lot more higher chances of rotting, and they will also lose a lot more leaves because they will convert their leaves into energy for their roots. So it might take a very long time for your plant to grow a lot if you planted them in a very big pot right away. So I have another succulent, I have another pot here that I would recommend if you're still rooting your succulent, and that is this shallow pot. So I found out that succulents that planted in these pots dry out faster, and also since they don't have a lot of space to cover for their roots, they will also start to produce newer leaves much faster, because the roots will actually reach the bottom of the pot much faster compared to if it is in a bigger pot. So in shallower pots, they have less space to cover. So with less space to cover, then they can already transition their growth into their leaves and not into their roots anymore. Now, the reasons that I gave you is actually not a very comprehensive list of problems when it comes to succulents. Actually, I have another playlist of fixing succulent problems right here at the channel, where you can find out that I try to fix a lot of the problems when it comes to succulents, especially when it comes to growing them in tropical climates like ours here in the Philippines. So if you may find problems when it comes to succulents that I haven't discussed in this video, please make sure to check out that playlist, and also please make sure to subscribe so that you will be updated when I have new information when it comes to caring for succulents. I always try to produce new content, new informative videos for you guys. Also, if you like the tips that I gave you in this video, please make sure to hit the like down below. It really inspires me a lot. And also, if you have any other questions, just comment it down below and I will try to reply to the comments once I read them. And that's it for this video, guys. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.